This is the second of our Forensics for System Administrators webinar series. I'm Stefan. Like the other presenters, I'm with DFN-CERT in Hamburg, Germany, and I'm happy to be our host, your host for today and for next Thursday, actually. Because after Klaus introduced you to this topic last week, we decided that this webinar and the following webinars will be split up into 2 sessions each, because there's so much to talk about, and we didn't want to actually do 2-hour or 3-hour sessions, but decided to split those into 2. So today will be the first of a 2-part webinar on what we call from suspicion to detection. So we're ready to go, I hope. So this is the road ahead. So again, last week, Klaus talked a lot about organization and preparation and workflows in terms of incident response and forensics. Today, we will take this one step further. You will be seeing a few slides that has Klaus already showed you, but we decided it would be a good idea to repeat some of the things which are really important. And the next topics will be memory and persistent storage acquisition. So that's where it gets into the real nitty-gritty details. So let's get ready to start. But before we start, I have a confession to make, because a large part of this talk, actually, I borrowed slides from a very dear colleague from the last decades, I would say, Leif Nixon from Sweden. He has given a talk called Introduction to Quick and Dirty Forensics for many, many years. I don't think he's in the audience, and he doesn't know that I stole his slides or some of the slides, but I will give credit to him this way, and I will definitely point him out to the slides afterwards. So I really like this talk a lot. And that's why I decided I will take some of these things for my presentation. So you think you have an incident. How do we actually know? This is something Klaus has already talked about a bit last week. So how do we know we're dealing with a security incident in the first place? Well, the obvious things would probably your monitoring systems, your security appliances, whatever, your firewall, your IDS, raise an alert. So yes, there's false alerts and false positives, but many times you will need to investigate something which will be alarmed by your firewall, for example. You may have warnings from external sources like...
Stefan, please excuse me to interrupt you, but we
Sure.
have a number of people asking you to turn down your microphone input a little bit, because,
okay.
Yeah, sound is a bit strange.
All right, sorry, I will try. Yeah, the volume is very high. Is it better now?
For me, it's fine. I will check the chat, please.
Yes, please do.
Continue. Yes, it's better.
I will just continue.
So, thank you.
Thanks for letting me know. Okay, where was I? Yeah, okay. Well, where would be the source for a possible security incident on our side? So it may be an external alert. So there may be a CERT warning you, like we do. We warn our constituents all the time. You may have a company which you pay for, so a managed security service provider who alerts you on stuff like, you know, the system not fully patched or vulnerability that was found on your systems. Very often your IP addresses show up suddenly on block lists or threat intelligence feeds, which are also there. There's a number of feeds out there, and which we'll be talking about in the second part of this presentation a lot. You may have this typical unusual system behavior. So the system you're looking at just is weird. Something is different, but you cannot really tell what it is. There may be a really high load, many processes running, or the disk usage increases. All these may be indicators for a security incident. And of course, you or your admin colleagues, you look at your log files and you may see something like you've never seen before, or something you cannot really tell in the first place. What is this? And then, of course, you might have a user and says, sorry, I shouldn't have done this, but I clicked on that link. I opened that attachment, although I've never communicated with that person before. So all those might be indicators for an incident. And so you need to investigate. So what are the next steps? The caveat at this point is there's no real formal process or definition for dealing with such an incident. So unfortunately, we don't have any checklists which you can just get out of your desk and say, okay, these 10 steps I will follow, and then I know whether or not it's a real incident or just a small thing, which is not really that important. And that's especially true since there's so many number of locations on your systems to look for possible intruders or attackers, whatever. So it's not really that trivial to begin with. But our rule of thumb for today is that today and on Thursday, we will be looking at what we call live response. Klaus has been talking about this a bit in his presentation. So the rule of thumb for today is we collect first from the system we're investigating and analyze all the things later to see what's really going on. So we try to quickly collect as much data as possible on the running system. So the advantage, obviously, is all the data which vanishes quickly, such as running processes, LORAN sessions, network connections. We can collect those before they vanish. That's what we call volatility. But of course, we do have possible disadvantages at this place. So the attacker, if there is an attacker, he or she might notice that we notice him or her. So they may be alerted and change their way of behavior, or they vanish, or they delete traces or whatever. And what we shouldn't forget, we are actually working on a potentially compromised system. So can we really trust the system? Can we really trust the tools we are using on the system? If we have to use binaries from the system, and everything we do, we will make changes to the system and possibly destroy evidence. So that's really something we need to take care of, or we need to just remind us every now and then. So there's a principle which has been around for decades now, and it's not really from IT forensics, but from real forensics, called Locard's exchange principle. Locard was a French police officer who worked in a lab, and so he was analyzing things that were collected from a crime scene. And what he tells us here is that even on a real-world crime scene, as soon as you investigate a crime scene, you will leave traces, no matter how careful you are. You will leave fingerprints, probably or likely. And the same is true for digital forensic, actually. So each time you run a command or you read a file on a system, you change, for example, timestamp information. And each time you write something to the disk because you might have your findings collected somewhere, you might overwrite things on the disk which may have been interesting to the investigation. So you should really try to do the least intrusive investigation possible, whatever that means. But you should also don't be too over anxious. You shouldn't stop yourself because, oh, I might destroy evidence. I don't do anything. That's obviously not the right choice either. So it's basically, it's a trade-off, really, what you should do. So the incident triage, the very first things are things that you do every day anyway. So things like look at processes and network connections and open files and stuff like that. You will probably look at logs and command line histories if there are any. And by the way, this is this slide especially is very Linux centric, but of course the same is true for other operating systems as well. But you get the idea what's going on here, or what should be going on. But you shouldn't do a few other things either. So don't try to verify at the very first steps of the incident. Don't try to verify if the system has been compromised. For example, many of you will know the package manager RPM. You can verify the integrity of those things with the command like RPM-VA. Don't do this at this point. Don't search for files on the whole file system, because again, you will probably delete traces. Don't reboot the system. Don't kill processes, because they might be not on the disk, so they might only be in memory. So as soon as you kill the process, the evidence is gone. Don't delete any files or directories. Don't run an antivirus scan, at least not at this stage. We're still at the very early stages of our live response, of our triage. So you will probably very quickly come to the conclusion, oh dear, there's an attack going on. And again, this is something Klaus has been talking about a lot, and we kind of repeat this often enough. Don't panic. There's no need to panic. Yes, we have an attacker or an intrusion, and the attack might be growing while we're looking at the systems. But the first thing you really do, take a break, take a step back, and then take your time and think about what will be the possible next steps. There's no need to hurry, otherwise you will make mistakes, and maybe more mistakes you would have made if you just take a break first. And I think one of the interesting or important things, again, at this stage is talk to others. Don't try to handle everything on your own. I mean, you probably need to talk to your supervisors anyway, but communicate with your users, the management, maybe partner sites which are involved in this incident. But no, please, no finger pointing ever. Don't go to the user test. You shouldn't have clicked on that link. It's your fault. No, it's not. Don't do this. But talking is important. So again, this is a slide which Klaus has been presenting last week, because at this point you have to decide, okay, what's the next steps, the overall next steps? Do we really want a real forensic investigation, which may contain evidence that will stand up in court? This is hard to perform, and it takes a very, very long time. I've been performing quite a few investigations which ended up in court, and it's always takes a lot of time. And no matter what you will write into a forensics report, the other side will always try to find errors you made. So you probably don't, at this stage at least, don't want to have a real forensic investigations, because this is probably not something you will do, but some external expert or even law enforcement will do this. So today we're talking about quick and dirty investigations. All you want to do is you want to answer a few questions, what happened, and clean up afterwards. But again, you will destroy evidence this way, and you should always remind you of that. So one step back quickly. This is something Klaus has showed you, because this NIST special publication on the incident response workflow, I really can recommend a lot. It's not a huge document. It's something really worth having a look at in the preparation phase. And today we're at the detection and analysis phase here. So what are we interested in? What are our main goals? Again, it's probably the obvious questions you would ask yourself anyway. But the first thing we always, the question we will always be asked is, was it a targeted attack? This is especially a question which comes from CEOs, CIOs, CISOs, because all I want to know is, were we targeted as an organization, or were we just unlucky because the malware which spreads through the world anyway hits us as well? So sometimes it's the only question, and when you say no, it wasn't targeted, they say, okay, no further investigation needed. But that's obviously not the questions you will ask yourself as an admin who makes an investigation. So how did the intruders go in? Did they find a vulnerability in one of our systems? Have we unpatched systems and they broke in that way? So this is especially useful because you want to clean up afterwards, and you want to close your vulnerabilities, and you want to patch your systems so the intruders don't come back. When did they do what? What have they been doing in the systems? Are there other systems on our side involved? So, for example, what we call lateral movement. What we very often see is that attackers use a maybe not so important system on your organization or in your infrastructure, which may not be as well patched as other systems, and they use that system as a stepping stone in order to gain access to other systems, because there already is a trust relationships. They may have used this as a stepping stone to target outside organizations as well. So again, it's about communication. And what is especially important for this last, I don't know, couple of months is, has data been exfiltrated? Many of you will have heard of what's going on in terms of ransomware. So when attackers target your organization, they not only encrypt your files and demand a ransom for the decryption key, but they also exfiltrate lots and lots of data in order to publish this if you don't pay. So that is really a problem that has hit a lot of organizations in recent months. So that's probably one of the things you want to know. Okay, so we have to do an investigation. Which tools do we use? The first thing, the good thing is you can probably use standard tools most of the time. So it's no real need to use special forensic or dedicated tools, at least not most of the time. So there's a term which we very often hear is the living of the land binaries. You may have heard of this as well. So it used to be called LOL-bin, now it's called LOL-bus, because it's also about scripts and libraries. So again, but it's a trade-off, as we can't really trust the system because it may have been attacked, and if the intruder has deployed a rootkit, we may be in trouble because the tools we will be using will show us something different than the real tools. So a good idea always is, especially if you're an IT administrator, always is to have trusted binaries and libraries prepared on, for example, an external thumb drive, a USB drive, an external hard disk, at least for the most common operating system which are in use. So, and then you can use those tools on the system and on an investigation, and you don't need to trust the tools on the system. Sometimes you need special tools, especially we were talking about creating timelines in a bit. That's where you need tools which are dedicated tools, and even better, there's so many dedicated forensics distributions out there, so which come as an ISO image, for example. There's a few very popular ones. I hope you can see my mouse pointer here. It's called DEFT and CANE. These three are really useful forensic distributions. So the goal is that they provide you with ISO images, which you can burn on a CD or a thumb drive and just carry this to the investigative system and run all the commands from there and collect all the things from there. And if you're into Microsoft, if you have lots of Microsoft systems, there's a tool suite which I can highly recommend. It's called the SysInternals tool suite. It's free from Microsoft. You can just download over 140 tools, which are really useful, especially when you're an administrator. They have been around for many years. They were basically programmed by two people which were not at Microsoft at that time, and Microsoft just bought their company. But all those tools are freely available and really useful. And again, put those tools on a special, I don't know, thumb drive and have it ready on your desk for the investigation. Okay, and then when you collect all those findings, where do you store them? And this is something where there's no single rule. You can just say that's the way to go. And actually, the term here on the slide, it depends. You will hear this a lot from us during these presentations. You will hear this a lot from during any forensic investigation. It really depends. There's no one size fits all. For example, one good way to store findings is when the system on an investigation is still connected to other systems in your network. You might just push the findings over the network to a connected system. Just a simple example here, we have a target system which we call server 1 in this case. Not a fancy name, but anyway. And we just use netcat, which many of you will know. You have it on Windows and on Linux system. You just listen on a specific port, and everything which was sent to that port goes to a text file afterwards for a subsequent analysis. And under the system under investigation, in this case host 1, you run a command, any command, and just pipe the output to the server 1 at port 1, 2, 3, 4. It's as simple as that. Again, if that's a possibility in your organization. Another good thing would, of course, be to just have an external device, plug it into the system under investigation, hoping that the findings on the external device will not be, I don't know, manipulated with by a malware which may be running. You don't know this, but this is one opportunity. You could try to use temporary file systems, but be careful, but because these artifacts can vanish quickly as well. And if you really have to store the findings on the systems you're currently looking at, then at least use dedicated directory and file names so that you can separate afterwards the things you did and all the other things. Okay. Okay, so let's go. The first things you probably in every investigation on a live response, you will first try to check the network status with commands like netstart, arp, ss, you name it. You know these things probably better than I do, because you want to know, are there any current connections from outside systems? Are there SSH connections which shouldn't be there? Has the routing table been manipulated with? So these things are usually the first things you do before you check other things on the system. And then again, you copy and paste the output from a terminal window to a local file, if possible. And afterwards, it would be a good idea, depending on the investigation, to isolate the system. Again, this is something Klaus has been talking about last week. So you could unplug the network cable, but leave the system running. Again, this might tip off an attacker, but this way you will prevent the attacker from hopping to other systems because it's no longer connected. You can, if possible, you can just introduce a new router or firewall rule to disconnect or to isolate those systems. Sometimes people recommend to cut the power. I don't know if that's really a good idea. It might be in certain situations, but actually I have not been through an investigation where that was a solution. So whatever is easiest or most appropriate, do it before you go to the following steps in the investigation. And if it's a virtual machine, of course, just snapshot it to analyze it afterwards. Okay, let's begin. So again, Klaus has talked about the order volatility a lot, and that's something you really need to have in mind when collecting things. So on a running system, you have lots and lots of different types of data in the systems, which varying expected lifetime. So some of the things vanish very quickly, and others have a longer lifetime. And so when you collect data from a system under investigation, you should basically follow the order. And again, this is something you've seen last week. Again, we're here at live response, so everything which is here, we may be interested today, and all the other things like post-mortem analysis is not the topic for today. But the usual things, I mean, if you've been doing admin stuff a lot, you will probably know this better than I do. You will look at processes, sockets, open files, network configurations. We've already done that. With one major exception, and this is something, a forensics or incident response topic, which has become more and more important during recent years, and in almost every investigation I've been involved with, or I've seen with other organizations, you are really interested in file system timestamp data. So all the files on the system that do contain timestamps, and we will be looking at those in detail in a minute. This is often the most important data, so you want to capture it very early in the process as well. Not only the usual order volatility, but the file system timestamp data is really important, because you can surprising insights, and we will be looking at timestamps and timelines a lot, especially in the second half of this presentation. And yes, I know timestamps may be easily tampered with, except one special timestamp here. But anyway, it doesn't happen that often in reality. So anyway, even if timestamps can be tampered with, collect the timestamps very early. And even timestamp manipulation can sometimes be seen, because it just timestamps look really weird. So let's take a quick deep dive into timestamps. One term you very often hear when you read blog posts about this is something called MAC times, so MAC, which stands for modification, access, and change time. This is due to the fact that early file systems, especially the Windows FAT file system, just carried three timestamps. But this is true for almost all the file systems out there. So the first thing we're interested in is called M time, the modification time. This is actually the last time the contents for the data blocks on the disk have changed. Sometimes called just last write time, the last time something was written to this very file. So that's the modification time. Then we have the access time, the A time. This is the last time the file was read or opened. That also means it's also the last time the binary was executed, which can be interesting to us. And then we have something called the C time. This often gets confused because it's not created, but it's change time. So this is actually when metadata of the file has changed. So one of the attributes in the inode changed. So the file was moved from one file system to another, or the owner changed, or permissions changed. So this is a change time, the C time. But it can also tell us when a file was created. So when a file was first written to disk, it is changed, of course. So that's a really useful timestamp as well. And again, these three are the ones you almost always see. And then you have special, not special, but you have file systems which carry other timestamps as well, especially in ext4, you have the CR time, which is short for creation. Windows, NTFS, it's called B time for born. So this is a very interesting timestamp as well. And sometimes on XX file systems, you have something called the deletion time. So this is recorded as well. So all of these timestamps are there, and with millions and millions of files on your disk, you may have a very interesting artifacts just from the timestamps alone. Okay, so let's create a timeline. So the quick and dirty way again, you can just, if we are on the Linux side, but Windows does it as well, run the stat command on just every file in the mounted system. So you just find from the root partition, you do a find, and then start with a number of arguments like 3 timestamps, the user, the group, that's probably the file name here, and just put all the results in a file, in this case called timestamp.dat. And then you use a tool called Timeline Decorator, which is by the live Nixon guy I mentioned at one of the earlier slides. It's just a simple Python script who transform those timestamps into a more human readable timeline and sources afterwards. So this is really a quick and dirty way. The caveats, of course, being, since you touch every file in the system, you overwrite any access time in the system. So keep that in mind. You also won't find deleted files because just the find command doesn't find those files. Again, be careful where you store your evidence, because you might overwrite things on the disk. So it would be a good idea to put this somewhere else. And again, what if there's a rootkit on the system? You cannot really trust this. But that's one way. If that's for this particular investigation, if that's your way, that's one way to do it, and it works. That's a good thing about it. But let's look at an opportunity to create a slightly better timeline. And this is where one of those dedicated tools come into play, which I mentioned earlier. And this is a cool tool called the Sleuth Kit, or TSK. This has been around for years and years, maybe decades even. And it's a set of dedicated toolkits which support forensicators in doing their work. The difference, especially in terms of timeline, is that the sleuth kit is, you don't run the sleuth kit on the running system really, so you don't start or find every file, but it reads the sleuth kit user reads the raw device. So in this case, def-sch1, for example, or if you happen to have created a disk image with a tool called DD or similar tools, the sleuth kit works on that disk image. And this will be discussed in much more detail in the upcoming webinars, especially on the persistent storage acquisition presentations we will be giving you. But it's just 2 commands you run. You tell a command called FLS, which is ls file listing, recursive mode, the mount point was / and just put everything in a rootfs body file, which is it's not humanly readable. That's why you need to run another command called mactime and create a human readable timeline. And the cool thing about this is it does not change anything on the investigated system because it does not read the files. So it doesn't change access times, for example. It finds deleted inodes and directory entries because it's not affected by rootkits. It doesn't need the file system commands. However, you have to have the binaries on the system or make an image of the disk. Again, persistent storage acquisition. Not all file systems are supported. A lot of file systems are supported. I would say the major ones are supported by the sleuth kit, but not all the files. So you may have a file system in your organization which is not supported. There's a number of known issues which you have to know, and which we'll be looking at later. And sometimes it's just easy to forget other mount points. So we talked about the root partition up here, but what about the other things like /boot or /temp? So this is not really something major, but you may end up forgetting about those mount points when creating your timeline. And this is actually one example of what a timeline created by the SluiceKit looks like. Very simple example, but you can already see a number of interesting things here. For example, here something was created which stands out just because of the user and group name. And it also tells you here's a file which apparently was deleted, but the information, the meta information, and the timestamps are still there. So this is much better than the simple timeline created by find and stuff. And we will be looking at this example in a bit more detail later. And for those of you who don't like working with just text output or plain text files, there is and has been for a number of years a graphical user interface to the SluiceKit, which is called Autopsy, which has other strengths. So, for example, you can easily see there's a point in time where a lot of file system activity has apparently been going on the system. So this is maybe something you want to investigate further. And it also has, kind of really see this here, it also has previews for certain file types. You can look at thumbnails from images, for example. And it's a really nice combination. Personally, I prefer the command line thing, but it's what you like best. So it has to fit your workflow. Okay. But let's take this even further. As I said, timelines have become more and more important in recent years during forensic investigations. So what we really love to see in the timeline, if you look at the system, again, any operating system doesn't matter. Not only files do carry timestamp, but lots of other interesting sources do timestamps. So for example, there's lots of metadata embedded within files. For example, binaries usually carry compile times, or PDFs carry create date times. Well, the last print is probably not the most exciting example, but you get the idea. So you have to look inside the files for additional timestamps. Of course, you have Windows event logs, which carry every single event log entry carries a timestamp. When you look at the Windows registry, every Windows registry key contains a timestamp of when it was last written. Might be interesting as well. We will be looking at the registry in detail a bit. And of course, you do have other timestamps all over the place. So wouldn't it be a good idea to have all those timestamps included in the timeline we created earlier, which should give us a much more bigger picture, much more interesting picture during the investigation. And that's why they call it, the authors of the tool I'm going to present you next, they call it the super timeline, because in the first place, it sounds like a good idea to put all those things into a super timeline, but those timelines easily contain millions and millions of entries. And so you may probably not want everything in the timeline, but it's difficult at this point in time to decide what are we really looking at. So meet Plazo, or log to timeline. Log to timeline actually was started out as a Perl script, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, written by Kristín Gudjónsson, a security researcher from Iceland. And this is from the website, I just copied it. The initial purpose was to collect all timestamp events of interest on a system and have them aggregated into a single place for computer forensic analysis, also known as super timeline. It used to be called log to timeline and then renamed it to Plazo. Apparently Plazo is a word in Icelandic. I have no idea. But nowadays it's called Plazo, but the log to timeline script is still there. And like the SluiceKit we looked at earlier, it reads the raw device. So it's not on you don't run it on a running system. It's running the raw device or a disk image again. And it's actually pretty easy to use. So that's the usual approach is, first of all, you use the tool called log to timeline as a Python script, and just say that this is a storage file we want to put all the timestamp in, and this is the image we are reading from. So we have a storage file. This is a term they use for log to timeline. And the next thing is the p-sort. That's actually an analysis tool. The p-sort outputs to in this case, a CSV file, but you can use other file types as well, read from the timeline.plazo storage file. There's only two It's only 2 commands you really need. Of course, both commands have lots and lots of options, and I'm going to show you at least a few of them just to get you an idea how powerful this is. But if you're lazy, you can also use a tool called psteal. Psteal is simply just a wrapper around those 2 tools, log2timeline and psort. And it doesn't support any options. So this is a really quick way of creating a timeline. And the log2timeline actually is like the other tools, is open source and everything's free. And by the way, all the tools I'm showing you are free and open source. And this comes with lots of parsers for different things. And for me, it's a very good example, or another good example, of open source projects which really live from an awesome open source community. There's so many people contributing to these projects. It's getting more and more useful and powerful all the time. I really recommend for you to look at those things if you're interested and if you have to work with timelines. Okay, just a few command line examples so you get the idea. So again, if you know from the first place, I'm only interested at this stage in time in, for example, Windows event logs. You could just tell log2timeline, just use Windows event logs. Don't put out any other filters, any other timestamp into the timeline. You can always come back and introduce other filters as well, other timeline timestamp sources. When analyzing things, you can use what they call event filters. For example, you can say, well, this is I'm only interested at this point in time in everything provided by this log and every body file which contains root. Root in this log is probably something interesting I want to look at. So don't show me the whole timeline or the whole super timeline, just the artifacts I'm interested in this place. Or it also supports things like time slices. So again, very often in investigations, you have a defined timestamp where something weird happened. You can tell psort during the analysis to just give me everything around this particular point in time. And the usual slice is, I think it's plus and minus 5 minutes. So you get the 10 minutes time slice and look at what happened during that time. And it also supports tags. You can just say, I'm only interested in what you found in the registry, and entries contain something like .exe or .dll. This might be interesting. So you get the idea how powerful this is, and you don't need everything in one term. I had to do this screenshot because this is actually all the parsers and plugins which come with log2timeline. So it's not only about Linux and Windows. They also support Android and Mac OS, and every single parser looks at timestamps within, for example, this time Chrome cache or Safari history, things like the master file table on Windows, all that compound files, so Word and Office documents, prefetch files. You get the ideas, and you don't have to run all the parsers on everything, but you can. You can also say, I'm only interested at this point in time in web history things. Then you run only these parsers. So it's really, really powerful and really, really useful, and is under heavy development. So all the time new parsers and versions come out. So have a look at this. So when you when you create a timeline, this is the one we looked at earlier, the simple one created by the sluice grid. And this is how it can look like when you use log2timeline. So you immediately see there's lots of different sources. We do have the Windows registry from timestamps, we have from event logs, the file, of course, and other things. And so this is much more useful, but again, it's also much, much bigger. So you need to find a way to find the interesting stuff. And there's actually on this screenshot, there's nothing we can need to talk about. There's no intrusion going on here. But you get the idea. It's much more useful than just timestamps from files. So now we have created the timeline. What do we actually want to investigate during our live response? And again, it depends. So depending on the nature of the case, you may look at the things you as an admin you look at anyway: process trees, files and sockets, malicious files you may have found on your system, You may want to look at the memory, but this is a topic for the next webinars from Klaus. Packages which are installed or binaries which have been replaced by the attacker. So we're not going into detail into any of these or all of these things, but I wanted to quickly give a few examples of what we were probably looking at in most, maybe not all, but most investigations. And first, of course, everything about users and accounts. So you may want to run things like last log, login CTL if systemd is in you, and check, for example, for currently logged in users. Are there any users logged in there which shouldn't have an account or should not be logged in at the moment? Do we have lots and lots of failed logins, which may point to brute force attacks, or someone trying to log in to a system which where he doesn't have an account? Latest login per user. Do we see a strange login, for example, a user which is not supposed to log in on Easter Monday at 3 a.m. in the morning, stuff like that. New users or groups which have been created, especially everything with user ID 0 or group ID 0, or in Windows the domain admin group shouldn't be there. So this is probably something you want to investigate in most cases, right? Then you probably will be looking at processes. And if you're familiar with Linux or Unix, you know that these options given to the PS command produce a lot of output. And especially powerful is something called PS tree. And this is probably something you want to do very early as well. So look at things which are strange, which don't belong there. Look at duplicate system processes, for example, more 3 or 4 inids probably shouldn't be there. However, this is especially true when running investigations on Windows. There's one particular process called svc host, service host.exe, and there's lots and lots of things svc host.exe is running on a regular Windows system. Do you really know how many should be running? Or is maybe one of those processes a malware which just calls itself svc host.exe? So sometimes it's difficult to find out. Look at process IDs. System process IDs usually are close to one another because many processes, system processes are started right after reboot. So the process IDs are usually very, very low. So if you have a system process with a very high process ID, it can be suspicious. It doesn't have to be, it can be. Then strange command line arguments like this one. If you find something like this in the timeline, this doesn't look like VI, does it? I mean, it carries an IP address and 2 numbers here. This is probably something you want to investigate. And then weird inheritance. So processes which start other processes which shouldn't take place. For example, on Windows, a WinWord example, a WinWord binary, which starts a command shell. This is weird. And then PowerShell, this is even weirder. So this is something you want to investigate. Actually, for the last thing, I have a screenshot here, which is, and by the way, it's a current Emotet example from about 2 weeks ago. Many of you will have heard of Emotet, and many of you will know that Emotet re-emerged about 2 weeks ago. And this is an example from a process tree where the user obviously got an email. This is an email, and so Outlook.exe is it's okay. It's not a problem because we're looking at an email. And obviously, the user clicked on an attachment, a Word attachment, which was attached to the email. It's even the file name contained. And then we have, as I said, command.exe and PowerShell.exe. This is strange, and this is not something you will ignore. Okay. By the way, this is not an output from one of those tools, PS tree, or from the sysinternal suite. This is actually from a malware sandbox called any.run. But it gives you an idea of what may stand out during an investigation. Temporary files. It's really surprising how often you will find temporary files during an investigation. There's so many places where, not so many places, but so many situations where artifacts are left over or even forgotten by an attacker. So very often it's intermediate steps, such as the attacker downloads an archive or a malicious file from one of his IPs, extracts it on the system like we see here, this is actually a real case we had in June from one of our constituents, and I'm pretty sure they are listening. So hello to you guys. So this is something, someone downloaded a tar archive, a zip tar archive, and a hidden directory, not really hidden, but a directory with a dot at the first character is being created in this case. So this was something. It's also in a dot directory. So you might not even not immediately recognize this as evil. But this is something left over, and you can investigate this afterwards. Or like I said, this is the example of something. Someone downloaded something called shell.sh, put it into the temp directory, made it executable, and executed it afterwards. So this is something you will very often find, and it's very often the usual directories because they are world writable. So it's temp, it's var temp, it's c temp on Windows, or c recycler even. But be careful, because when you just browse through the timelines, especially on the command lines, you sometimes overlook things like this. So it's three dots, not two. So this is shouldn't be there. At least it's suspicious. And another good artifact in especially in Linux and Unix investigation is the bash history, because you all know the history. It really allows us to look over the attacker's shoulders, because everything he did on the command line or on the shell will be written to the history. It doesn't contain timestamps. That's unfortunate, and unfortunately it can be, and sometimes is, turned off by the attacker. There's a number of ways to do this, but even this sometimes leaves traces. But so this can be suspicious as well. There's which not everyone knows. There's the -T option for SSH, which opens the connection without a TTY allocation. So you won't have a history there as well. One good thing though is, and this will be talked about during the memory forensics part, that the process memory from a running bash process also carries a history. And this one even contains timestamps, as we see down here. So this is really good. It's never written to disk, but if you manage to grab the process memory of bash, it's a good idea to look with tools like volatility, which we will come to much later. Okay, you might ask yourself, this is a lot of handwork. This is a lot of things I need to run manually. Aren't there ways to automate this? Can't we just write our own scripts, or just run all those scripts in one run when investigating? Well, yes, you can. Of course you can. And there's even lots and lots of tools out there who offer this functionality, but it may not be such a good idea. So one example is a tool set called IR Rescue. Again, on GitHub, free and open source. IR is short for incident response, of course. And I just read it here, but from the GitHub page. It's composed of two sister scripts that collect a myriad of forensic data from Windows systems and from Unix systems. The scripts respect the order volatility, which is a good thing, and artifacts that are changed with the execution, especially prefetch files on Windows, and are intended for incident response use in the analysis and investigation process. So go and have a look at it. The reference section of our talks, like you know, if you've attended our talks before, the reference section contains lots and lots of links to these things. You don't have to Google it right now or write down any URLs. But they also say it should be noted that the script launched a great number of commands and tools, thereby leaving a considerable footprint. For example, strings in memory, prefetch files, execution caches on the system. So, and this is obviously is not meant as criticizing this tool or the authors or any of the other tools. There are other tools out there as well. And you can, of course, you can do your own, create your own script collection. But do you really need all those tools that are run from such a framework, I would call it, during your investigation? So it's a trade-off again. These are cool tools, but they may do more harm, and they may provide too much information, which is always a problem in forensics. But these tools are out there, so go and have a look if that's interesting, or if it's a use case for your organization. So now we've collected all those valuable artifacts from the system or those systems. What's next? The analysis part. And this is actually where I have to not say goodbye, but where we will finish for today. And we will take this further on Thursday, and I hope to see all or many of you there as well, because we will be looking at some of the analysis things. So interpreting timelines, for example, looking at network traffic from the point of Wireshark. We will talk about threat intelligence and finding system indicators of compromise, IOCs. Lots and lots of interesting stuff coming up. And for now, I thank you for attending, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful, Stefan. Thank you so much for that. If anyone has any questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording now so that people can actually ask specific questions offline without recording. Is that okay, Stefan, or would you prefer the recording to carry on?
Can carry on. I have not looked into the chat yet.
Okay, no problem. We'll keep it on. So if you've got a question which you don't mind sharing with the wider world, then please ask away in the chat box. Thank you.
It's really busy here. Hello, hi. Nice to see you as well. Hi. Yeah, I'm much later.
I can't see any questions at the moment. Oh,
No, neither do I.
Just turned up. Are the slides available for later download? Yes, they will be. I'm sure they will be.
Yeah, both the slides and the video as well.
Yeah, cool.
It's like, what are you doing here? So yeah, we haven't seen in a while. So.
Okay, good. Thank yous. Thank you so much, Stefan. This is really interesting. It's not my field of expertise,
Thank you.
but I found it very interesting and enlightening as we were going through that. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, everyone, for attending, and I hope to see you all on Thursday.
All right, great. That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Stefan. We'll close it now.
We have two more questions coming up.
Ooh.
Okay, let me see.
One about the malware sandbox and one about securing volatile data.
After securing highly volatile data, unplug the power or shut down the system. Which would you prefer?
Can't seem to find the question, sorry.
Yes, Martin has asked us, after securing highly volatile data, unplug the power or shut down the system. What would you advise?
If it's an either-or question, I would say unplug the power, because shutting down the system will lead to things vanishing, which may be still there when you unplug the power. I mean, especially on Windows, for example, or even on Linux, when you unplug the power, you may have the hyper file or a page file, which still contains lots and lots of interesting things.
Okay.
The malware sandbox mentioned called any.run.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Well, we're coming to the end of our time now. I'm sure everybody needs a coffee and a quick break before their next meeting, because we all have meetings back to back at the moment. So thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you very much for the team.
Thank you for moderating.
We'll close this down, and I shall see you all on Thursday. Thank you.
Yes, I hope so. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. All right.